Hi, and thank you for joining us for Cave Talks. I'm Kimberly, and I am the program director here at My Quiet Cave, where we create space for faith and mental health. And today we have Dr. Ray Mitch joining us. Thank you for being here. Dr. Mitch is a licensed psychologist. He's also serves as professor and chair of the Board of Psychology at Colorado Christian University in Lakewood, Colorado.
Department of Psychology.
Department of Psychology. Thank you.
Don't make it sound more important than it is.
Oh, well, you are very important. And thank you for talking with us today about grief and loss. I very much appreciate that because I know this is a topic a lot of people don't want to talk about.
Absolutely.
Or they're terrified of talking about. They kind of tiptoe around and just don't know how. But you do it very well. How do you do that? How do you do it so well?
Well, I think talking about grief and loss is easy, in the sense that in everyone's point, how do I say that? Everyone is going to experience it at one point or another in their lives. Everybody does, and even right now, whoever sits and listens to a video like this has somebody in their life that has experienced some grief, and sooner or later we will all experience it. So it's a universal thing. The problem is, I think we make grief somehow discontinuous with the rest of life. So we kind of separate it out, and then we're in this place, but we're not in life anymore. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross once said, really, death and loss gives meaning to life, because there's an end, and that end is part of it. So I think, for me at least, talking about this subject is really vitally important because it tends to be very taboo. You know, when you interact with somebody who's been grieving, for whatever it is. I mean, again, we lump together grief and loss. Well, grief ends up being something of losing somebody to death, but loss is everybody's experience. And then the question is, how do I interact with somebody who feels lost from a loss? And that's really, I think, the biggest challenge is, how do I enter that person's world, validate where they're coming from, and not try to fix them, which is really easy to do because we feel helpless. And the irony is the person we're talking to feels helpless too. So, here's one helpless person trying to help another helpless person. And what do? Is we tend to kind of paste on the platitudes and other things, trying to make the other person feel better rather than just entering into their world. And the problem for most of us, I think, is that I don't know what to say. I don't know how to do it. I don't want to do it wrong. I don't want to make them feel worse. And usually the news is you can't. They've already experienced something as bad as it is. The only thing that's really going to help them is a connection with somebody who's willing to enter their world without trying to fix it for them. So, so part of that, I think, we have to talk about what I have laid out for people. And I think lesser losses, if you want to put it that way, grief, the losing somebody to death, I think for most people is probably the culmination or the pinnacle of all what's bad about losing somebody, all the way down to, but you can't compare them. Pain is pain, no matter which way you cut it. So with someone who has lost their job, there's a lot more to that than meets the eye. It's just because they don't have an employment or money coming in, there's meaning, there's purpose, there's a lot more to that. When I lose somebody who's died from my life, that's kind of the bigger one out of all of them. The thing that I want to make sure that we communicate is don't compare them. Because the person that has lost their job is feeling every bit as lost as the person who has their spouse die. So that's the first thing we have to start with, is let's not compare any of this stuff. Let's just look at it on a flat surface, in a sense, and understand it that way. So what I like to talk about is something that I call seasons of grief, and that's a part of understanding that grief cycles rather than grief is a straight line. And for most people, I think when you talk about grief and you look at it, a lot of people will go to the kind of the famous grief researcher Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she has stages, and the problem with stages is they're linear. And you talk to anybody who's grieving, and it's like, I'm not there right now, so does that mean I'm in the next stage, or I'm losing ground? Because we tend to, when we do the linear thing, we tend to measure ourselves. So I think looking at grief from a seasonal point of view is more realistic, because you start with winter, all right, easy one to start with. Everything's dead, and I feel like my feelings are dead, and people feel dead inside, and they go through denial. And denial isn't just, no, this can't be happening. Denial is, this shouldn't be happening, or this person wasn't that important to me, or it's not that big of a deal kind of thing. And the biggest thing about that in terms of winter is everything's dead, so they just kind of plod through life and feel kind of automaton, feeling things that way, and they don't experience much of life at all. And when you think about it, in winter, we don't either. We just stay inside all the time. It's like, no, I'd rather not. So that really captures kind of where we are when the death occurs or the loss occurs. The question isn't so much how do we kind of undercut it. The question would be, what kinds of things can we do to deal with it? And the first big task is to accept the reality of what's really going on. So how do I do that? Well, I can talk to people. I can journal some things out. Some people hear the word journal and it's almost like you're showing them dead meat. It's like, I don't want anything to do with that. Yeah. And I'm not talking about being Hemingway. I'm just talking about more just writing out what my day is like and what I'm struggling with and those kinds of things. And those are the tools, I think, of winter. Because, in winter we use a shovel, we don't use a rake, and so the tools are specific to the time that we do it. So journaling and looking through old things and visiting places that you shared and things like that are all ways to kind of begin to adapt and to adjust to the reality. That season tends to be longer than most people think. Partly because at the front end of it, we're not feeling anything at all, so we're not really doing any work with it at all. So naturally, once I say seasons, everybody knows what comes next, and that's spring, and things wake up, and flowers come out, and life comes back, and unfortunately for people that are grieving, so do their emotions. And so their emotions wake up and they're overwhelmed with those emotions. And really that's the second season, is how do I experience the pain of what I've gone through? And in my book, I talk a little bit about someone, I don't remember who, said that grief is a little bit like a psychological burn wound. And when people in the old days, I probably remember it, when someone had a really awful burn, a lot of times they'd take them and give them a really stout shot of Demerol, throw them into a whirlpool, and scrub their wounds, because the poison that was building up in their body from the burn was going to kill them. And so this season where the emotions start to wake up, I liken it to that. I've got to find a way to scrub the wound and kind of lean into the pain, which is really hard to do. Nobody wants to do that. But, we all feel or understand that, it's like the old phrase you see in a gym, no pain, no gain, right? Well, yeah, there's a certain truth to that. There's a place where it gets so overwhelming that I'm not going to adapt to it very quickly. So there's that. And in that season of spring, again, journaling is a constant all the way through, but different tools for spring. And those tools end up pushing into music that reminds me of somebody, or meeting with people more. And this is really the place where once the emotions start to wake up, I really do need to be sitting with other people and talking to people that understand grief, who aren't going to try to fix it. They're just going to listen to the story. Because the reality is that most of the time when these emotions wake up, people feel like they're losing their mind. And they need somebody to say, I've been down that road. I know what that feels like. No, you're not going crazy. This is all normal. Most most of the time that I've had where I've sat and talked to people, I more often than not I'm saying to them over and over and over again, this is completely normal. This you're not psychotic, you're not losing your mind. This is part of the kind of disorientation, like being tilted upside down, that grief does with us, and that's kind of important, I think, to talk through. This is the same place where if anybody struggles with dealing with other people's expectations, it's the same place where they get caught up with, I should be over this by now.
I hear that one.
This shouldn't be taking this long. And the funny thing is we would never go into a hospital and look at a burn victim and say, it's been 3 months. Come on, get up. Let's get moving. And that's and so the problem with grief is you don't see the wound. So the spring comes and goes, and like I said, winter can get intruded upon by early spring, and spring can get intruded upon by winter, and the same way with summer, which is where now I start to adjust to the world without the person in it, which means I got to try some new skills. I got to get involved in other groups. I might have to do things different from what I had with the person I shared it with. And the tools a lot of times are more active at that point in time, and we are more active in the summer. So we get out and do more things and take a class maybe, or do something different, kind of push us out of our comfort zone a little bit. And that's the kind of readjusting or adjusting to the environment without the person in it. And really the final season, if you will, is fall, which here in the Rocky Mountain area, it's bursting with color. And I have a lot of people that say it feels like color has re-entered my world after they've gone through kind of the seasons. And again, fall, we use different tools for fall. A lot of times it's walks and other things like that. Sometimes it's returning to the gravesite if the person has died and writing a letter of goodbye. It's things like that are kind of recycled. And I think in the fall, we've got to kind of reevaluate and say, maybe there's some touch points that are still hard and it's raw, and I need to kind of push on them a little bit. But I'm at a better place by that time to do that. And so the fall is kind of a reorientation and so forth. Now, once we get all these set up, here comes winter. And winter, the second winter, if you will, is littered with anniversaries. Christmas, Thanksgiving, you want to do it in kind of a literal calendar sense. But the same thing is true in just wherever it happened. My dad died when I was 12. He died in April. And April was always a tough month. It really was. And all the memories flood back and all the things that come along with it. And then you had, in my case, April, and summer's just waiting. It's like all the stuff we did during the summer is not happening anymore. And so it's those anniversaries that are really tough. Obviously the big ones, birthdays, Thanksgiving, holidays, Christmas, New Year's, all that. But it's the same way. So the beauty of a model like that is it sets our expectations. And the one thing that I think tends to interfere with how people handle loss is the expectations they have of how long it should take and what they should look like when they do it. And then you add in the audience out there, what people think you should do. And unfortunately, people are pretty generous with their advice around people who grieve. And that usually triggers a number of reactions on my part. But, I think a lot of times people, one of the first things, easiest one, is tears. And a lot of times the grieving person ends up taking care of the people who came to actually take care of them. And so they start to cry or whatever. And one of the first things that come out of their mouth is, I'm so sorry. I can't hold it together. And my contention is actually you are finding how to be together by allowing the tears to exist. And I finally came to this place myself where I just said, look, I'm not going to apologize for my tears. I refuse to anymore, because they're a symbol of how much that person or how much that event or how much that mattered to me. So why would I choke that off? because the person then can say, oh. And, the funny thing about it is that happened in Jesus' life. Because when he went to see his friend who had died and had been buried for 4 days, the most profound verse is the shortest verse in the Bible, and everybody can quote it. It's all within the range of most people. Jesus wept. The thing that isn't captured there is that just before that, John, the disciple that wrote that book, describes something that is like an emotional eruption. And then Jesus weeps. And the people around said, wow, he must have really loved his friend. I thought, well, I mean, if Jesus can do that, maybe I should have some permission to do that. Yeah. So that's a short, condensed overview for grief. Yeah.
So talking about other people's opinions,
right,
and worrying about that. Is there a wrong way to grieve? Is there a time where it becomes, quote, unhealthy?
It can. I think a lot of times the people that are going into the grieving or the loss, and they bring with them some of the issues you've been talking about with maybe depression or anxiety, right, or things like that, then it can get exacerbated and kind of complicate the picture. And then you have to be realistic about looking at some of that, because the depression, and then you add loss into it, and then it bottoms out into suicidal thoughts and things like that. So yeah, there is that possibility. I think in the broad band of things, there's a lot that is really just normal that is not wrong. I think the reality is our culture is so, we've gotten kind of taught to take care of other people before we take care of ourselves, and that's true in our culture too. So is it wrong to cry and quote unquote fall apart? No, it's not. But why do we say that that's wrong? Because it makes somebody else uncomfortable. Right. So there's a lot that's normal, I think, in there, that I'd rather start with normal, and then look at the outliers, which are where things are difficult and added to by psych issues and things like that. But the big band is normal stuff.
Most of it is normal.
Yeah.
So there's not really a time limit, like by X amount of months or years, you
right,
should be, that maybe this could be depression. And
yeah.
so then you have to look at all of it.
And if it obviously, I think if the depression continues beyond,
right,
then yes, we need to obviously take a look at that. But
yeah,
otherwise, like I said, I'd rather err on the side of saying, let's start with normal, and then let's add these other things in that might help us understand that, and then go from there. Yeah.
I know another thing in our culture is just this kind of lie that we're never supposed to feel bad. We're
right,
supposed to feel good all the time and happy all the time. And if you're feeling bad for X amount of weeks, like, here's some antidepressants to just feel better. Not saying that medication is wrong.
No, right. I think what we've got is this culture that has a commitment to feeling good, and even if I don't feel good, at least I look good. And that usually is always in the service of not making, if you want to put it that way, making somebody else feel bad. So we've got this collusion going on amongst grieving people, that they don't dare come out because they've already kind of said, I'm going to make people feel bad if I show all these emotions. I'm not going to do that. So, I think the big part of that, what's often happened when you mention even like the antidepressants and things like that, is we end up pathologizing something that is entirely normal. And when you look at it, even if you look at history, it isn't until the more modern era with hospitals and things like that death has become a threat to the happiness you were talking about. When in fact, in days gone by, we're just past July 4th, in the revolutionary times, most families had their own family cemetery, which meant that you walk out the front door and you see Uncle George out there. Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, that's continuous with what life is. It's not, but we've kind of removed it because of some of the things you're talking about. And unfortunately, even in psychology, we pathologized a lot of things that are just a normal part of being human. And that's unfortunate, I think. So,
It is.
yeah.
And I know you've touched on a few things about people trying to make others feel better.
Right.
The person trying to console, trying to make everything okay.
Right.
Are there some things that we can do
Yeah, I think.
as supporters?
Oh, absolutely. And again, some of it is resisting the temptation to make somebody feel better. And that sounds bad. I mean, it sounds like, well, that my impulse is to want to help. The problem is my helping, the way that I tend to help makes it worse. So how do I reverse course on that? Well, I've got to reframe helping in terms of not fixing, but of connecting, and connecting with where that person is. Because, we love our platitudes. We love to kind of box things up nice and neat and kind of put it on the shelf, and there, I don't feel bad anymore. And platitudes, I cannot tell you how damaging a platitude is to somebody who's grieving. So, like we were joking around about, the heaven's gotten another angel, or things like that. And those kinds of things are probably more, I'm probably going to put my foot in it here, but those kinds of things are probably more for the speaker than they are for the receiver. And if we want to connect and help somebody who's grieving, then we've got to kind of put aside our desire to fix something or box it up and get into the mess of the helplessness and uncertainty and the doubt, and not try, just say, I'm here, I'm with you, I get it. And that's hard. That is really hard to do, because nobody really trains us to do that. I didn't. I mean, I was fortunate when I was a kid that the lady who ended up being my mother-in-law, little did I know, actually trained me how to receive condolences from people. And they were driving me to my home. I was staying at their house, and she looked over the front seat and said, now listen, this is what people are going to say to you, and this is how you receive their condolences, and explain what condolences was and all that. And we don't get training, in a sense, to say, how do I enter a person's world and connect rather than provide some solution and let the rest take care of itself. And that's harder to do, because who do we trust then to do that? And if somebody has some measure of spiritual commitment, a lot of times that's the place where they're going to start working that stuff out, because death has a way of forcing us to deal with ultimate issues. When I die, what then? And it's an important one. That's what gives meaning to life, rather than eat, drink, and be merry, tomorrow we die. So there's a lot of, I think, that goes into it. So start with authenticity. I don't know what to say. Start with vulnerability. I really want to help, but I'm not sure how. Asking the person, what do you need? They may have no clue what they need. So if you have a close enough relationship with somebody, friendship with somebody, you can do a little thinking for them and say, show up at their house one evening and take them for an ice cream cone. I like ice cream. At least somebody's going to like it. And it just gets them out of the house, and that's just thinking, in a sense, for them, because they're not thinking about that kind of stuff. A lot of times people won't eat because they've lost their appetite, but they still need to. But they're not going to do it if they're alone. And so inviting people out to do things, there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be the philosopher and the counselor and all that kind of stuff. Just take them for a drive or anything at all. It doesn't, we think way too globally about this stuff rather than just practically, and to go and get a cup of coffee or just whatever. That's enough, really, to say, one, I'm thinking about you. Two, I'm not sure how to go about helping you, but all I know is I can offer my presence. And three, we can talk about anything you want. It doesn't have to be about your loss. And that might be a relief for the person. So
It's really just showing up.
it is.
And being honest
It
and
is.
authentic.
Yes.
Like, I don't know what to say.
Right.
I want to make this better and I can't.
Yeah.
What can I do for you?
Right. And that's hard for people
Right.
to do because they want to help so badly that it never, I think a lot of times just doesn't occur to us to admit what we don't know because we think the other person needs to know something and they don't. They just need a connection. So, yeah.
So what can we do, or what kind of resources
Yeah.
could you tell maybe somebody out there listening? It's like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm going through this season. This is really,
Yeah.
I'm really connecting with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I'm just stuck right now, and I don't know what to do, and I don't have the people around me
Right.
to do this. Are there any kind of resources out there, or
Well, I mean, a lot of recovery ministries a lot of times will have a grief recovery group.
okay,
Grief Share is a very good program. It's been around for 15, 20 years. It's a video-based kind of program support group for people that are grieving. I think that's a really good resource. Increasingly, and I say this kind of cautiously, but increasingly there are groups, if you will, online of people that are sharing experiences with one another that way. And I think there's a place for that. It's still, connection is very fragile and very stretched when you use the social media or other kind of groups, Facebook groups and things like that. But I think for grieving people, it's recovery groups of some sort. My book is not meant to teach people about grief. It's meant to walk with people through grief. And now and again, I hear filtered reports of people getting together and using the book as kind of the central point to sit around and talk about what's in it. There are a few podcasts on iTunes that I can't vouch for, but I'm sure I know that they're talking about the grief and loss stuff. So those kind of resources are out there. I think a lot of times the books that are out on the market, at least today, around grieving, end up teaching people about it rather than entering their world. And so I think the greater need for most people, if they're thinking about a book, it's to find something of somebody's account of how they did it and what they worked through and so forth. Mine came out of my loss at 12, but then I say when I teach my class, I made all the mistakes. I didn't grieve for 10 years. And I just said, I'm done. Check me out. I'm not going to do anything here. And so there's a lot of how I wrote that is out of a lot of those mistakes. So I think some of those resources are out there. The Grief Share and probably recovery groups are probably the two that I'd say are the best possibilities, because a lot of churches in recovery has gotten into the mainstream of the church, like Quiet Cave and other things, to sit and say, all right, this is where I'm at, this is how I'm feeling. Other people are not going to try to fix you or anything like that. They're just going to listen to the story. And the more you tell your story, the more you're likely to own it. So,
yeah. And that's what we stand for too. Yeah, telling
Sure.
our story and just sharing that connection with others.
Sure.
And yes, I don't think I mentioned that you are an author as well. You've written 5 books, and your best-selling novel is Grieving the Loss of Someone You Love.
Right.
Is the book that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I do think you do an amazing job of walking through that and not just teaching us about grief, but it's kind of that experience.
Yeah, that book, I shake my head. That book has been on the market for 26 years. It's in its second edition. Not technically, but it was it was almost an accident, but it came up, and I think it kind of came right out of where I was, and I think people probably have appreciated that. So yeah.
And they can still order that.
Absolutely.
And your website, Dr. Mitch.
drmitch.com.
drmitch.com. We'll
Yeah.
put that up on the screen as well.
Yeah, and Amazon. On Amazon you can look it up. I think it's somewhere in the top 10, somewhere like that. So it'll show up on a search if you put grieving and it, you know, I like I said, I'm just kind of amazed that it's still around. So all the other books have gone to dust, but that one's still around. So yeah.
Well, if we need a copy of that.
Oh,
I've got a copy
okay.
upstairs, so I don't need a copy.
All right. Yeah. Right.
But yeah, they can
Right.
reach. And I know you have other resources and blogs as well.
Right on the website,
website.
there's plenty. There's my blog and other resources. Some made available to students, and people can still get access to it. And I just finished up a Shame and Grace class, and it'll probably show up there too, so people want to listen to that. The Grief and Loss class hasn't shown up just yet, but it probably will eventually. So
Well, thank you
Yeah,
so
you're
much for
welcome.
being here.
my pleasure.
And explaining. I love hearing you talk about your seasons of grief
Yeah, great.
model. So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And like I said, the website is going to pop up on the screen. And if you have any other questions for us or for Dr. Mitch, you can probably contact him through the website.
Yep,
as well.
absolutely.
And if there's another topic that you want to see on Cave Talks, just go to our website at myquietcave.org. Reach out, email us, give us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you for being here. And thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks.